let's talk about solitary. Graham, like how many? What is the? How widely and extensively is solitary used? Like for what purpose? I mean, this is ostensibly just a place where people are waiting for a trial. Why is there even like a solitary, I don't know, program?
Well, it depends on who you ask, and it depends on what language you use. There's a struggle now over what is. The correctional department will tell you, we don't have solitary confinement. We don't have punitive segregation. We don't separate people. But at the same time, we've learned that in fact they have done that. They just recently they took a bunch of young men out of the jail I mentioned earlier, and they put them in isolation cells in a different jail because they had been acting out and perceived to have been causing trouble. This is a really broad topic, but there used to be a unit called the BING, the Central Punitive Segregation Unit, where people were sent. Initially, separating out people who cause violence in the jails was the idea, right?
Right. I mean, obviously, if somebody is attacking other prisoners, you want to separate them, or if they are maybe, I guess, particularly like being targeted, maybe you want to separate them.
Correct.
But
that would be like administrative segregation, to separate someone out for their own protection. But what happened was, the initial idea of separating because they were being violent became the categories of why you separate someone become larger and larger and larger and larger. And so you could be separated for all kinds of reasons. Because Reuven interviewed somebody who was put in solitary confinement for possession of aspirin,
Tylenol, Tylenol and makeup.
Yeah. And so if you take someone,
that was Kubi. Kubi had that client, right? Yeah. Okay. Ron Kubi.
Yeah.
You take somebody, particularly with mental illness, who's mentally ill, and you put them, you can't control them, so you put them in solitary confinement. It only exacerbates the situation. There's an anecdote in the book about a tour of the jails and a tour of a solitary confinement area by this environmental specialist, and he comes across a man in a cell who's clearly decompensating. The cell is over 100 degrees, which is a violation of the law. There's a certain limit on how hot a cell can be before you have to air condition it. And there's a generator right outside this man's window, which is belting out a very high decibel noise on a constant basis. It's just running constantly. Talk about a series of conditions designed to make this guy totally go over the deep end.
I mean, just the idea of if you are, I mean, putting aside the ridiculousness of punishing someone because they have Tylenol in their possession and maybe some makeup, the fact that you are punishing someone and putting them into solitary confinement, it shows that it's not being used for the protection of other prisoners. It is being used to punish people. And it's just simply not their mandate to do that at Rikers. And the problem is that I guess this is sort of throughout the book. There's just no political will by anybody or political power to the extent that, I guess, legal, lawyers who are defending people. There's no power or will to fix any of this stuff.
I mean, I think that's one of the things we tried to highlight in the book with this story is like, we went by topic, and what we're hearing is this, even from like just different eras, like different, decades, was like the same problems kept coming up and over and again. One of the issues we highlighted was the record keeping. And, Graham and I, like in our kind of day jobs, have reported how, they've done these kind of individual scandals of like them kind of fudging numbers or trying to like kind of, manipulate the figures. And we interviewed people in, the 70s, 80s, 90s and aughts who and they all had kind of different stories about how this was going on. And to this day, they actually use something called logbooks where they physically just kind of write in kind of basic incidents. They don't have like a computer system to record kind of the day-to-day happenings in the jail. And that's, again, by design, because they can kind of manipulate that.
Has there ever been an attempt by, let's say, a prisoner or just maybe, I guess, just out of the DOJ for feds to come in and say, this is inhumane treatment. Like, this is what's going on here is unconstitutional, that you can't detain people for 8 years when they haven't been convicted of a crime. You can't, I mean, I don't, it seems to me ridiculous that you can detain anybody for a year. You know, we have a right to a speedy trial, and have the feds come in? Have there been any attempt to sort of like get the prison shut down based upon some type of federal action?
Sure. I mean, I'll take part of it, and Reuven can take part of it. Yeah, I mean, there's been a series of class actions going back to the early 70s. The system is very stubborn. It resists change in a major way, and the feds did come in. There was a multi-year investigation that led in 2015 to a consent decree against the city of New York because violence was so out of control, and that brought a federal monitor, who's been on the job for 7 years. The federal monitor has issued one report after another that is highly critical of how the system operates in every possible way you can imagine. And still, we're not seeing the results of all of that work.
There's actually 3 other monitors that have been in place, including one for conditions, one for I think the release of how they handle the release of mentally ill, and I forget the third one. But this is, some of them have juvenile, right, for the juveniles, right? Yeah, thank you. So I mean, these monitors essentially have been in place for a long time. They, to some degree have made, there have been improvements, but it hasn't changed enough for the courts to say, okay, we don't need this oversight anymore. And now there's a tremendous push to have the federal judge overseeing kind of the juveniles to appoint something called a receiver. And the receiver, it's a kind of a very unique situation. There's one in California. There's only a few others in charge of kind of jail systems. And the one in California is just in charge of kind of the medical. There was one in Cook County, Illinois, that was in charge of the kind of the juveniles. And it would essentially be a person the judge decides who could run the jail and would have the ability to change any of the rules, like any of the union contract would kind of essentially be fair game and kind of just start almost fresh and say, like, if you have the opportunity, like from scratch, how would you run this facility? And, just kind of come at it from a totally new perspective. And the argument is in support of it is to kind of take the politics out of it. I mean, ultimately, the receiver would likely need to work with the unions and the city, as far as financing goes, as far as rules go. You need to get buy-in from the, people working there and, the people overseeing the jail. But it would be this, this incredible kind of change. And the people who support the receiver have said, look, there have been commissioners over the last 20, 30 years who've come in, and they've all been well-intentioned. They've all said, I want to change this. I want to make this work, and I want to improve this. And some of them have had incredible knowledge and insight in how to run jails, and none of them have been successful. And that's why they're saying we need a receiver who can kind of start from scratch and has more power than a traditional city correction commissioner.
Where are we on the efforts to close it? Because I know that the idea was that if it gets below 4,000 or maybe it was 3,000, then the city can close it and essentially disperse the jails around the city. Where are we on that, and what was the plan?
The plan was to get to build 4 new borough-based jails with a total capacity of about 3,300. The current jail population is just under 6,000, and the city is floating the idea that it's by the end of this year it's going to be above 7,000, which will make it difficult to close. They're not really putting any data behind that estimate. It just seems to be, so far we haven't seen what that estimate is based on. So there's an issue there with the population, and it's kind of what we're seeing is sort of a convergence of 2 big issues of closing Rikers and the backlash against bail reform. So now the idea since that crime has spiked somehow should negate a plan to close Rikers, and that, you know, there's a perception that's being floated that things are so out of control that the jail population is almost certain to increase, when really, you know, it's possible to get it's possible to get the jail population down. Now, the question is, can they do it by 2027? And that becomes then a discussion about the logistics of construction and design and funding and all of that. And it very well possible that could very well possibly be that the plan will be somehow delayed.
But I mean, with the without bail reform, this would just disperse some of the same issues, I'd imagine, that you guys that you wrote about. I mean, some of the interviews you do with, say, you did with corrections officers, where they just talk about how they beat up a prisoner for 4 hours because of disrespect or something like that. I mean, isn't that just kind of endemic to the way that we imprison people, like, largely in this country, systemically, as opposed to, I mean, Rikers exacerbates it, of course, but isn't there a larger conversation that's necessary first, a larger change that's necessary first before before the breaking up of Rikers would make that much of a difference?
I don't think you can read the book. I mean, I think people should read the book and come to their conclusions. Everyone's going to bring their own lens to it, but, you know, the legacy of decades, you know, of what's happened in Rikers from the voices of the people who lived it. I mean, you know, you'll hear from the officers themselves, the retired officers, some of the same kinds of things about the conditions, about the way the system operated, about, you know, the pointlessness of just putting people through over and over again on low-level arrests, the failures of the system to handle the mentally ill. The officers are almost all of them we talked to said, you know, it's completely unfair to put us in charge of somebody who has severe psychiatric issues, because we're not trained for it. They're simply not trained for it. And you know, so overall, you know, I think that the book offers the opportunity for people to think about really what they want out of their jails. I mean, you know, all over the country.